some symbolism that they know.
Without word.
Yeah.
Without
Sure.
word. No, so
They're still doing this. They're not using the English words, but they're still doing this. They still have some concepts. How they relate to that in some sort of language or symbolism, I don't know, but they still have concepts.
Make sense of it for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They don't need a language to be communicated because they're on their own. It's okay. So, there was something else I wanted to add. Oh, yes. So, another thing is what we're saying here is that the result depends on the cause. But this view is also saying the cause depends on the result. So how does the cause depend on the result?
You need a plant to produce seeds.
Yes, but that's not the answer.
You need someone to observe it. To observe the...
It's in relation, like
Maybe they're the same.
to know what is a seed, we have the concept of a tree.
Exactly.
Gives meaning.
Exactly. You can't have the idea seed unless you have an idea that it's going to potentially produce a plant. You can't have the idea cause unless you have the idea result. Whether or not it produces is irrelevant. So you can only talk about causes and seeds if you have the idea, plant and result. So that's the answer. One last point, and then it's time for another break. In terms of parts, actually to show this, does anyone have a pen that I can sort of pull into bits? I can take apart into pieces. Okay. So we say that the pen exists depending on the parts. And we understand that intellectually, but we often relate to this as this is a pen. As if there's a pen there from its own side. But is there a pen to be found here anywhere in that basis? Is this a pen? Oh, this is a bit hard to pull apart. Oh, no, it's easy.
This was a pen.
Is this a pen, this tube? No. Is this a pen? No. Is the plastic tube a pen, just the tube? Is the ink inside a pen? Is the round ball on the end a pen? Is this other piece of metal a pen? Where's the pen? And people go, oh, that's easy. The collection of that is the pen. Oh, no. It has to be in a certain shape. Okay, you have to tell me when the pen comes into existence. No. No. No one's willing to say anything yet.
Yeah!
Everyone agree? I think some people maybe not agree. So
That functions.
What about that? Oh, you don't need that. Okay. So what we can understand from this again is that we bring the pen into existence when this configuration of data closely enough resembles our concept of pen. And our concepts usually have at least two parts, appearance and functionality. So when this appears to be closely enough resembling our concept of pen, and it seems to function according to our concept of pen, then there's a pen. So the pen does not exist from its own side here. Because if the pen did exist from its own side here, it would mean that if, for example, a caveman came in the door, they'd see a pen and start writing with it. But I think if a caveman came in, they may see some sort of like weapon, stabbing with. And then if a dog came in, maybe they'd see some sort of chewing stick. And if a tiny ant came here, they may see some sort of home to live in. So is this a pen, a weapon, a chewing stick, or a home? From its own side, none of them. From the side of the observer, all of those things. Now, what we're saying then is that the pen exists depending on the parts. Normally we say this is a pen, or the pen is the collection of the parts. But these two statements are saying two very different things. The pen is the collection of the parts versus the pen is merely labelled depending on the collection of parts. If we can understand those two statements are not saying the same thing, we're beginning to understand something about emptiness. The pen is something labelled depending on the parts. Now, here we have an example of one of the things I often talk about is the idea of cognitive fusion, where we fuse two things together and make them one, cognitively, mentally. And this is a classic example of this, because here we have the bases, stuff, changing in every moment. We have the label pen, not changing in every moment. Sometimes we refine our concept, but pen. And we apply that label to the basis. And we need to do that to communicate. So no problem applying the label to the basis. But what we do is we fuse the two together. We fuse the basis and the label. This is a pen. Then we have problems. Because then the pen becomes something existing independent of our conceptual framework. And then we relate to it in that way. And then, of course, the whole attachment, aversion, pleasant, unpleasant thing, which we talked about before. Whereas if we can not only intellectually appreciate we are labelling pen on this, and that's useful, if we can do that experientially, and we can do that experientially by realising emptiness, then we can relate to this experientially in the correct way and not generate any mental afflictions or suffering. So that's all I wanted to mention now. Any last question before we take a tea break?
Is our conceptual framework is part of our ignorance?
Conceptual framework, no.
Why not?
Because conceptual framework is useful. It's helpful.
But
So conceptual framework...
see the reality not the way it is.
No. So, well, there's two parts to conceptual framework. What we're talking about, what exists and how it exists. So conceptual framework, to usefully call this a pen, that is valid. Nothing wrong with that. But also we have conceptual framework that says, oh, this exists independent of me. That conceptual framework, of course, is creating problems. To see this as an independent pen. But to merely see this as pen, as something called pen, it's useful. So that conceptual labelling is fine. So that's fine.
So is it similar to the stimulus happiness? Is it similar in this way that when you're stimulus joy? Sorry, when I'm asking if it's similar in the way that it's okay to be happy about things, just
Sure.
don't think that this is going to last. So is it similar to that? It's
Yeah,
okay
so,
to think this
exactly.
way about reality because you have to, but just don't think this is the way it is.
Yeah, so same idea. Like, we look at these flowers, we have a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
And if we can experientially see that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, no problem. We enjoy the flowers when they're there, and we don't have any craving for them. Because experientially, we see beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But generally, we don't do that. Intellectually, we may appreciate beauty in the eye of the beholder, but experientially, the beauty's there. So I want those flowers because they're making me happy. That's the problem. So again, bring intellectual into experience, realise emptiness, we realise beauty in the eye of the beholder, we can enjoy pleasant things 100% without any craving. Good. Okay, let's take a break. Again, about a 20-minute break. We'll come back at 4:30. I want to do a meditation on the plant. See what we can come out of that. And then a few more things to say before we wrap up today.